And I'm grateful to get the opportunity to do this tonight. So I'm glad you're all here. I'm glad you're all those that are joining us online. Want to talk a little bit about fear tonight, and kind of see if I can't dovetail that into fighting against God, and kind of sometimes how we find ourselves at odds potentially, and maybe how we can prevent that from happening. But as we start that out, we kind of want to figure out whose side we're on, and that sounds pretty obvious. We really want to be on the winning team. That seems like an easy choice, but sometimes we don't always find ourselves on that side of the battlefield, maybe. So starting out, I want you to start trying to think about, what are you most afraid of? What is that what you're most afraid of? Is there anything out there that when you think about it, you just shudder? Just thinking about it. And if you actually saw it play out, it would stop you in your tracks. I don't want you to give yourself too much anxiety at one time, but try to think of something that does that in your mind. Maybe it's something that's happened before, or maybe it's something that you take great precautions to make sure that it never happens. Can you see it? Is it a rational fear? Is it something that could actually happen or has happened? Or is it an irrational fear? Maybe it's something that we've let our minds take us down that probably isn't likely to really happen. Now, if you got that in your mind, try to think about are we more afraid of something, or are you more afraid of something that you can see? Or are you more afraid of something that you cannot see? What are we more afraid of? So I'll list a few if you're having a hard time thinking of one. Maybe you're afraid of losing your job or going broke. Maybe that's a fear, a financial fear. That's a real fear. Maybe you're afraid of something happening to your kids or to your spouse or a loved one. That can be debilitating, just the thought of it. Maybe it's your health. That phone call that comes from the doctor's office that says, hey, the doctor has got your pathology report back, sure like for it to come in the office and go over that with you. We can make an appointment for next Tuesday. How's that sound? Good luck sleeping between now and then. Some of you in here have got that phone call. That's a rough week and a half, and beyond. Or how about the 800-pound gorilla in the room? How about COVID-19? If we can, let's spend the next at least couple of minutes, if we can peel back all of the politicization and partisanship of what has been surrounded by COVID-19, and just think about it from the fear that it's created over the last year. Various spectrums of the fear scale, okay? But somewhere on the spectrum, we could all find ourselves. You can't see it. It's scientifically microscopic. We can all agree, whatever science we want to follow, it's microscopic. You can't see it. So that's true, as are all viruses. We can see its effects. We can. There have, in fact, been people hospitalized, have been on ventilators, organs ravaged by it. People have died from it. We know that. We can see the toll that it's taken on not only the human body, but on our society as a whole. The disease itself or the fear thereof. We can see both. We got to watch, I was going to say front row seats, that's not true. We were actually players in this particular situation. You didn't get to watch this one go by. You were a participant, whether you wanted to or not. But we watched the whole world stop and take notice of something, which was very interesting in looking back, and even still watching it. But the whole world took measures. The whole world took measures to protect ourselves from it. We donned face coverings, right? We put on something to protect us. We saw face shields, still see face shields. If you go get tested or go get a vaccination, you're going to see that. We physically distance ourselves from possible sources, not confirmed, possible sources of the virus, just to lower the chance of coming into contact with it and thus succumbing to it. The whole world. In short order, by the way. We installed plexiglass barriers in places, physical barriers in places of business to avoid contact. We all, as a society, went physically out of our way to give a potentially harmful and very deadly thing a wide berth. Some out of fear, some out of going along with the crowd, some out of respect, all on varying degrees of the fear spectrum. What about sin? What kind of countermeasures do we take to protect ourselves from the spread of sin? Can sin be seen? You see, the beauty of getting to preach for one night and then being done is you don't have to have the answers to all the actual questions. What about sin's effects? Can they be seen? Oh, yes. They can be seen. Do we have any examples of sin's symptoms, what they might look like? Because we know COVID-19 symptoms, we got a list of those. Are there symptoms we could see of sin? Well, Paul writes in Galatians 5:19 through 21, the works of the flesh. So we won't read through all of them for sake of time, but they're there. The symptoms of sin are right there, listed one by one, right before the fruits of the Spirit. We like to talk about the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, patience, but we don't like to talk about necessarily the symptoms of works of the flesh, but they're there. Do we cover our faces from it to protect ourselves? Do we install barriers? Maybe that could be called healthy boundaries in our lives to avoid potentially dangerous situations, to potentially come in contact with it. Do we go out of our way to distance ourselves, to avoid potential contact or exposure to the very deadly, harmful ravages that sin can leave in its wake? Have we ever got to see the whole world do that? Do we fear sin? What about God? What about God? Can we see God? Can we see evidence of God? Yes, we can. We can. Marty and Doug did a great job this morning, actually. If you didn't get to see Bible class, you go back and watch it. They did an amazing job of demonstrating just that. But yeah, Romans 1:18 through 20 says, summary, his attributes are clearly seen through what has been made. We can look around on any day really, but a day like today, you look around and you would have a very hard time suppressing the truth, and the truth being that there is a God. Because like 60 days ago, this didn't look like this outside. 60 days ago, this was a very different place, was it not? Yeah. So, his attributes are clearly seen through what's been made. We're made in his image. We have some type of law written on our hearts. Everybody. Not just folks in this building and other people watching. The whole world. There's something written here. And that came from somewhere. Now, you can deny it, you can suppress it, and there's things we can do to ignore it, but that doesn't make it any less there. Do we fear God? I submit that rather than fearing, respecting, or revering God, the world often finds itself fighting against God. Mostly because we really don't like accountability. But how is it even possible to fight against God? I mean, everyone in here, particularly on a Sunday evening, we recognize that God is omnipotent. He's all-powerful. He created the universe. Fighting against him isn't even a fathomable act. But we have examples. You can go to Acts 5, 38 and 39. There was a fellow named Gamaliel. Remember that story? Part of the Sanhedrin. So obviously this is after the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. The Jews are pretty happy because they've got this whole Jesus problem fixed. They think he's gone. So this Christianity thing is going to go away. Well, it hadn't gone away. They're 5 chapters in now to the book of Acts, and these apostles are still running around spreading this stuff. And they're irritated. The Sanhedrin is. So they're doing what they can to stomp it out. Gamaliel tells them to be careful concerning their treatment of these apostles. He says, verse 38, "So in the present case I tell you, keep away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or this undertaking is of man, it'll fail. You're not going to worry about it. Just wait it out. It'll go away. They'll scatter, and it'll dissipate. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them." And he adds to that, you might even be found opposing God. And it ends with, so they took his advice. 2 Chronicles 13:12, "O sons of Israel, do not fight against the Lord, the God of your fathers, for you cannot succeed." It is a zero-sum game to fight against God. So why then would anyone be so foolish as to oppose the maker of all things? Is it not tragically true, however, that Paul in Romans 3:18 is indicative of too many men and women of our society, just like it was 2,000 years ago when he wrote? In Romans 3:18, there is no fear of God before their eyes. You can look around at our world today and you will have a very hard time finding a fear of God. If people were half as scared of Jehovah God as they were of COVID-19, we'd have a whole lot less problems in this world. A whole lot less. In spite of the infinite love and awesome power of God, there are billions of people who will not seek the counsel of the one true and living God, his constant guidance, and his perfect peace, which he has promised us, by the way. And we're warned about this in Romans 1:18. "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." When we do not see fit to acknowledge God, only chaos and ruin can result. And by the way, regardless of our attitude, however, or the attitude of the world, God has not abdicated, nor has he been overthrown. In other words, the world's refusal to acknowledge the true and living God or submit to his divine omnipotence does not negate his existence. He's still very much here and very much alive and very active. So what are we really afraid of then, if that's the God that we follow? You know, the theme of do not fear and do not be afraid, it rings throughout the Old and New Testaments, throughout the Bible. They're told, be strong, courageous, do not be afraid. Do not fear. I am with you. I go before you. Jesus told his disciples over and over, do not fear, do not be afraid. Now, I will say, I take personally a little comfort in all of that, not only to hear those words, do not fear, but to know that they were also afraid. Evidently, people were afraid throughout history. Otherwise, we wouldn't hear those words said over and over throughout the Bible, because this thing was written over millennia. So being afraid is, apparently I'm not alone in being afraid of stuff. So there's some solace we can take in that. But it also tells me it must be a very fearful thing to be in the presence of God or in the presence of even heavenly beings, based on what I've read in Scripture. You know, we can read about Mount Zion actually shaking, right, when he was addressing the Israelites. And it ended up, they were so scared that they begged Moses to please ask God not to address us directly anymore. Please. This is terrifying. And seemingly, most times you read about an angel of the Lord or maybe Gabriel or Michael showing up throughout Scripture. What is the first three things they say? Do not fear. By the way, even when they have good news, do not be afraid. I bring you good tidings of great joy. Well, why were people so scared to see him? I don't know why necessarily, but there must be something, A, very unexpected about it, and B, very intimidating to some degree to be in the presence of that. Looking forward to finding out one day. So then, are we afraid of dying? Maybe. Are we afraid of dying because we'll miss out on the joys and pleasures of this world? Is that what prolongs our existence? These aren't questions I can answer, by the way. These are ones you had to answer for yourself. Are we afraid of what happens when we die? And we've got some scripture that speaks to that a little bit that you can look up. But, you know, that one's kind of paradoxical, right? Being afraid of dying, because the fear of the unknown is one of the most powerful and debilitating fears known to mankind. It's got to be up there. Yet, the only sure thing we all unequivocally know will happen to every single human being is what? We're all going to die. Ain't none of us getting out of this alive, as was said from this pulpit before. None of us. But yet, it's terrifying. In some degrees, debilitating. Like, physically, it could make you ill. That kind of fear. Sometimes we're just afraid of being marginalized as a religious nut. Maybe not being in the popular crowd. Maybe not being invited into the cool parties, or maybe not being included in the gossiping group texts. Or maybe you're afraid of being the subject of the gossiping group text. Maybe we're afraid of just not being liked. So, we compromise our morals. Another way to say that is we deny God. Just a little bit. Just enough to kind of make the cut and get in with the crowd. Then we're in. Now what? What will we have to compromise next? What else about God's righteousness will we have to deny to stay in? We should fear God. We should. A proper, rational fear can be a very healthy and legitimate motivator in life. It can be. Simple things like fear of touching a hot stove. It's going to keep you out of it's going to save you some pain. Fear of electrical shock. I like working on houses. I like doing plumbing stuff. Like I can do roofing, do a little carpentry, do a little concrete work. I despise electrical work. I'm scared of getting shocked. And I've been shocked. It's never fun. It's always a surprise. Always. And it's never comforting. Like, oh, what is so bad? It's always bad. Horrible. Even when I've cut the breakers completely, every breaker off in the whole thing, so there's that moment. Fear of crossing a busy street, or fear of watching a little one cross a busy street. Fear of not safely handling or storing a firearm. These are healthy fears. These will keep us out of trouble. They'll keep us from getting ourselves hurt. I'm glad I have sense enough to fear these things. What about God? Do I have that same healthy fear or reverence for Him? Or only when it serves me? Psalms 33:9 says, He spoke and it was done. He commanded and it stood firm. Jesus in Mark chapter 4, you remember the scene? He gets in the boat. The disciples went from afraid to terrified in a very short amount of time. Let's read that real quick, starting in verse 35 of Mark 4. That day when evening came, He said to His disciples, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took Him along, just as He was in the boat. And there were also other boats with Him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. By the way, if seas get really rough, that's where you want to be. You want to be in the very back, very bottom of the boat. That's where it rocks the least. Get you a cushion and get to the back. Anyway, the disciples woke Him and said to Him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, Quiet, be still. And the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And He said to His disciples, Why are you so afraid? Afraid. Do you still have no faith? By the way, He gives us an inoculation for fear right there. Evidently, faith has something to do with overcoming fear. Do you still have no faith? It says, why are you afraid? And then the next line says, they were terrified. They terrified of the waves at this time? Not anymore. There's no waves. What are they terrified of now? Who is this? Even the wind and waves obey Him. They went from afraid of the wind and waves to terrified of the power of God. We can say what we want to about their lack of faith, but they recognized what was going on, and they had enough sense to be afraid of it. This same God that the world can't see and chooses not to fear slayed 185,000 Assyrians overnight in 2 Kings 19. That same God put the entire Egyptian army under the Red Sea in an afternoon behind the nation of Israel. That's the God we serve. You want to be afraid of Him? I highly recommend a healthy fear of Jehovah God. Jesus rebuked His critics in Mark 12:24 when He said, is this not the reason you're wrong? Because you know neither the Scriptures nor what? Nor the power of God. You don't understand what you're up against. You don't have a healthy understanding of the power of God. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God, Hebrews 10:31. So how do people commit the tragic sin Gamaliel warned against in the first century of fighting against God? The first one is just rampant immorality. because it's just not as much fun. That's why. We're called in Philippians 4:8 to think on things that are noble, that are lovely, that are pure, that are of good report. Well, that's really not easy to do if we put ourselves in situations where the devil, who's the deceiver of the whole world, we read about in Revelation, can package his sensual, alluring vanities upon us. And we're told in 1 Peter 2:11, abstain from sinful desires which war against the soul. Forget about the fact of it getting you and leading you down a path you don't want to go down. It wars against your soul. But take one quick tour around the internet or one scroll through social media, and you're going to find it almost impossible to abstain from sinful desires. And it's not all sexual in nature, by the way, though there's no shortage of that. Lately, it could be something as simple as sowing a little division among brothers and sisters, or just breeding anger and animosity among families and friends. A news article, a share, a post, a like, a comment. Just stirring the pot. And good luck expecting anyone to be held accountable for his or her actions. The devil has society convinced that being accountable means an infringement on my rights and my truth. Who are you to tell me how I should live? Who made you the arbiter of right and wrong? Who are you to judge me? That's the go-to. But I'll tell you, accountability is not only healthy, but it's actually necessary for human development. I have a great business mentor, and one of my favorite quotes that he said was that when we fail to hold those whom we lead accountable, we rob them of their development. When we fail to hold those whom we lead accountable, we rob them of their development. What does that mean? That means if you and I agree on a goal, and you want me to help you hold accountable to that goal, and you don't do the things that make for that goal, and I lower the bar, because, man, you tried hard, and, oh, shucks, your heart's in the right place, and I just lowered the bar. I just robbed them of development. And it can be in a work relationship, it can be in a marriage relationship, it can be in a parent-child relationship, but if we fail to hold those folks that we lead accountable, we're robbing them of their development. And the reverse is also true, by the way. If you don't want to be held accountable, you're going to stay right here. You'll never get better. I don't want the bar lowered for me. I don't want to settle for mediocrity. I don't want to settle for excuses. But deep down, mankind knows the truth. They know. Now, because they know the truth, is our conscience a perfect guide to righteousness? Will it get us there? That's one of those questions that I don't have to answer. I don't know. But I will say, it may start out that way, but it probably doesn't end up that way. But it's a good systematic indicator for when things start to go off the rails. It does help with that. Our conscience, that little voice inside that says, hey, I'm a little uncomfortable here. I'm not sure this is somewhere I want to be with you. And then we have a choice to make. We can ignore it and drive on, or we can say, let's go back and recalibrate and check things real quick, see if this is something we should be doing. What's the problem with the conscience, though? That kind of is a trick question. There's probably nothing wrong with the conscience. There's probably Eric that's the problem with the conscience, because the problem with the conscience is I can choose to ignore it, thereby searing it. Like a steak. And it goes from tartar to rare to medium well to well done. I'm not saying it's a sin to cook a steak well done. I'm not saying it's not a sin to cook a steak well done. What I am saying is that the more you sear it, a piece of meat, the harder it is to penetrate that hard outer layer into the tender part inside. That's what it means. And because God knows us so well, he had the Holy Spirit inspire Paul to write in 1 Ephesians 5:11, take no part in unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. God knows what can slowly sear our conscience, which renders it useless. Guess who else knows that we can slowly sear our conscience, rendering it useless? The devil. Satan knows. He's crafty, and he can package things up that are tailor-made for Eric. Exactly how I like them. And he's so crafty, by the way, he can package and tie a beautiful little, what I call a ribbon of rationality around it. And that little ribbon of rationality is a bonus onto it because it makes it where I can explain it away as okay. That's how good he is. Clever he is, a better word for it. The next place the world fights against God is in the home. You know, God designed the home in Genesis chapter 2, which we went again this morning, in the very beginning, and Jesus reiterated this design in his ministry, that a man's going to leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And he must have, by the way, thought a whole lot about children in this mix, because he said that unless we become like them, we're going to have a hard time getting into the kingdom of heaven. And further about children, if we cause a little one of them to sin, it'd be better if we had a stone tied around our neck and thrown into the ocean. So children are special to God. And I would submit to you how they're brought up is really important to God. That doesn't stop the world from fighting against that design at every turn, though. We see extramarital affairs, a very high divorce rate, broken promises, pain, and they're all too familiar to every single one of us. And more today, we'll be told in this whole one man and one woman thing, maybe that's really not all that normal either. The biblical concept of the home and family is under assault today by society and by the media, and if you have the audacity to say something crazy like God's design for the home is one man married to one woman with disciplined children who have healthy boundaries and are accountable all to one another, you're very likely to be marginalized and labeled as a backwards thinking religious nut job, and quickly. We may find out how quickly on YouTube. We'll find out. You know, the Ad Council right now has a campaign underway. Right now, I saw a commercial. I remember I was watching the Astros or Masters or one of those. There's a crowd of people in the street, and they're looking at a gigantic X-ray machine. Now, the whole ad you can see on YouTube is like 3.5 minutes, but this is like a little 15 or 30-second ad, and I don't know if it has a name or not. I labeled it "Love Has No" and then blank, and it's got X-ray machine, and you can see two skeletons that kind of warm embrace. They hug and kiss one another, and then they come out the sides, and you can see who it really is. And in some cases, it's two little kids, you know, one disabled child and one non-disabled child, and they embrace, and it says, "Love has no disability." Of course, you're bored with that. And then another one maybe, you know, you see two skeletons embrace and hug and kiss, and they come out from the sides, and it's an African-American woman and an Asian man, and it says, "Love has no race." Yeah, okay, yeah. That makes sense. Then you may have another couple that they're obviously elderly and hug and embrace and come around, albeit a little slower, but they come around and come out, and it's, you know, been married 50, 60 years. Love has no age. Okay, I'm following. And then another embrace and kiss, come around the corner, two women or two men. Love has no gender. Just dovetailed right into the rest of the stuff. Not only things that the society finds as normal, these are other things, are things that God actually glorifies. Love one another. Be married for life. And we just usher this right in behind it. Here it is, packaged with all the other obviously acceptable relationships. We're slapped in the face with love has no gender, as if it's just as normal as a man and a woman married for 50 years, or I'm not a pulpit minister, if you hadn't figured that out by now. But I do know a thing or two about marketing, and I can tell you that if something is that fundamental and obvious and true, it does not need a multi-million-dollar marketing campaign to tell people that. You don't need it. People just know. If we don't stand up and speak for God's design for the family, we could find ourselves fighting against God. And the real future of America resides in the hands of the parents today, not the schools, not the government, not YouTube, not even Bible class, although that's a very good start. But it starts and ends in the home. Fighting against God's divine design in the home, and everyone's role therein will end badly every time. And if you don't believe me, have you ever seen a child throwing a tantrum in the checkout line after a 3-hour grocery ordeal? That's a thing of the past. You're very unlucky, Mom, I'm sorry. There was no Instacart when we were little. You had to endure. But used to was a thing. You go through this 3-hour shopping spree with these 3 evil brothers. And inevitably, somebody at the end going through, they got to have the thing of M&Ms. You're not going to have the M&Ms. I got to have the M&Ms. Then you can watch the child, somewhere between the age of 3 and 6, flailing on the ground, screaming, holding up the line. Brothers of mine, of course, not me. And how does that end? Get the M&Ms. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. What have we just done? That child grows up to be an adult, and that adult has one form of conflict resolution that they know and understand, and they know is effective. And it's screaming and yelling and throwing a tantrum and shouting until they get their way. And that's not their fault, by the way. It starts and ends in the home. So yes, there is a fight, but it's not against the Lord. So we should be determined to not ever find ourselves fighting against God. Ephesians 6:12 says, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against authorities, cosmic powers over the present darkness, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. That's what we're fighting against. And if you don't find that a little bit concerning, you need to go read it again. Spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. Just because, by the way, we can't see them doesn't mean they're not there. They're very much there. And just because we can't see them doesn't mean we shouldn't fear them, or at the very least respect the damage that they can inflict on us and our families. So there's a choice to make. It does make a difference what we believe and what we teach and what we practice. Jesus asked us in Luke 6:46, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I tell you? The devil is crafting a message today that we shouldn't be so binary. That's a word. It's a buzzword right now. There isn't such thing as all this black and white, right or wrong. It's very much more of a gray area. There's no absolute truth. Truth is relative. That's false teaching. Jesus, our Savior, said in Matthew 12:30, he who is not with me is what? Against me. It does not get much more binary than that. If you are not with him, you're against him. Period. I don't want to be caught in the middle of that battlefield with the two sides wondering whose side I'm on. Do you? Who will follow Jesus? Who will make reply? If you have a need, we're here to help. We're here to pray with you. We're here to bear one another's burdens. We're here to encourage you. We're here to encourage one another on this journey as we're pilgrims through here. And if you have a need, please don't delay. Come now while we stand and sing.